After that recent trio of negative TSW4 videos I made, although I don't think my criticism of the Mine Taliban and those two gameplay packs was unreasonable, I thought I should cleanse the palate by revisiting a route that I genuinely like, for the most part. East Coastway is, in my opinion, one of the better UK routes in TSW, covering a small section of the lines on the south coast. I previously reviewed this route in March 2023, but I wanted to update the review to bring it in line with the style of more recent reviews. This add-on was originally released in December 2019. Indeed, I remember when this was first released, around Christmas time to boot. The version compatible with TSW4 costs $43.59 NZD, which is a bit steep for a route this short. But these days, it's hardly surprising to see high prices for TSW content. You can also get the Class 313 EMU as a separately sold add-on. This thing was released in October 2021 and costs an additional 29 New Zealand dollars. As for route coverage, you don't get too much with this add-on, just the 23 miles of track from Brighton to Eastbourne, plus an additional 7 miles in the form of the Seaford Branch. Although I don't mind driving on this route as it is now, I still think Dovetail should extend it to Hastings, or better yet, Ashford. As I've said many times before, the problem with these really short routes is that they can get boring very quickly because there's not a whole lot to do. The good thing with East Coastway is that, on this route at least, you're not restricted to only running passenger services. Only two forms of motive power are included with the route, namely the Class 377/4 Electrostar and Class 66 diesel locomotive, plus the JNA freight wagon to boot. The 66, in her original EWS livery, was reused from Great Western Express, while the Southern 377 was brand new to TSW at the time of ECW's release. As annoying as it is to only get one variant of the 377, it's not as big of an issue on ECW as it is on the Brighton main line. But in both cases, I don't see any reason why Dovetail should have left out even one of the other 377 variants, such as the older 377/1, 3-car 377/3, and the more modern 5-car 377/6. If they made a gameplay pack that added even one additional 377 variant to East Coastway and the Brighton mainline, preferably the 377/1 and 377/7, that may well be the only gameplay pack I would ever willingly buy again. The Class 377 is the star of the route, and can be seen operating semi-fast services between Brighton and Eastbourne, while the 66 only appears on freight trains from London to the New Haven Aggregates Terminal and vice versa. But you can only drive these services on the short section from Lewis to the Aggregates Terminal. I've never really liked the sounds on the East Coastway 377, especially when compared to what you hear on the London commuter version, and why the ECW unit has seemingly reverted to her original sounds in TSW4 is anyone's guess. At least she still has that classic Electrostar motor whine. You only get one variant of the Class 313 in TSW, and that's the refurbished Southern 313/2 subclass, which differs greatly from the original units. These units were originally built in 1976 and 1977, for commuter services out of Moorgate and up to Welwyn Garden City or the Hertford Loop. The 313s were the first dual-voltage EMUs in Britain, able to work with either 25 kV AC from overhead wires or 750 volts DC from a third rail, although they were originally limited to just 30 miles per hour in DC mode. The units that would eventually end up working on Southern metals were ex-Silverlink, having previously been used on commuter services in North London that, in 2007, were taken over by Transport for London and rebranded as the London Overground. After being replaced by the Class 378 Capital Stars, which first entered service in 2009, 19 313s were transferred to Southern and refurbished for service on the West and East Coastway lines. The work involved removing the pantograph, which means the units were now restricted to only running on the third rail DC lines. Despite criticism against the 313's lack of a toilet and lower top speed than the 377's, 75 as opposed to 100 miles per hour, Southern's units remained in service for many years, with one of them, Units 313-201, being repainted in a heritage British Rail livery in December 2017. The final working of a Class 313 took place in May 2023, a few weeks after the farewell rail tour. Out of the 64 Class 313s that were built, one has been preserved so far, with that survivor being 313-121, the former Network Rail unit, up at the Fife Heritage Railway in Scotland. As an aside, I'm confused as to why Southern haven't bothered bringing in brand new trains to directly replace the Class 455 and Class 313 units, because I didn't think they would have had enough 377s to go round. After all, they've also got the West Coastway line, Brighton Main Line, and a myriad of South London commuter services to handle, as well as the East Coastway line. One unit that's missing from East Coastway in TSW is the Class 171 Turbostar. In real life, you'll also see these DMUs on the Brighton to Eastbourne section along with the 377s, as the DMUs run the Brighton to Ashford service, because that route is not electrified east of Orr. The Class 171 is largely identical to the more common Class 170, albeit with a different style of coupler that's compatible with those on the 377s. As for the default sounds, these are alright, in my opinion. I think they were supplied by Armstrong Powerhouse, as was the case with the similar-looking Class 314 on the Cathcart Circle line. And indeed, the horn is borderline identical to what you hear on the original 313 NTS Classic. If any 313 experts are watching, feel free to let us know how accurate the sounds are. In timetable mode, you've got 94 playable services for the Class 377, 144 for the Class 313, and only 13 for the Class 66. Compared to the EMUs, the 66 plays a very small part in the ECW rail scene, but any service variation is still a welcome addition in my books. The rail scene on this route feels reasonably lively for a secondary line, especially between Lewes and Brighton, but Brighton Station looks and feels a bit unrealistic without the Gatwick Express Class 387s. I don't see why those units shouldn't have AI-only layers on the ECW version. The 377s are used to represent services running from Brighton to Hastings and Orr, which you can only drive as far as Eastbourne. In real life, trains have to reverse here because it's physically a terminus station, thus following the same practice as what you see at Belfast Great Victoria Street Station in Northern Ireland. Confusingly, This means that the Brighton to Hastings and Orr trains will go through Hampton Park Station twice on the same service. On the section east of Brighton, the 377s will usually call at Falmer and Lewis before having alternating stopping patterns east of Lewis. Very few of the 377 services call at all stations. Instead, they often skip London Road, Moulsecoomb, Glynde or Berwick. There's also a morning and evening peak time service that sees a pair of 377s running as an 8-car train going down the Seaford Branch on a direct run to or from London, Victoria. The 377 runs on a fairly consistent half-hourly schedule throughout the day. Eastbound trains leave Brighton at 1 and 31 minutes past the hour, while westbound services leave Eastbourne at 10 and 37 minutes past the hour. It takes around 36 to 40 minutes to complete a full run from Brighton to Eastbourne in the Class 377. In my opinion, this run is neither too long nor too short. A definitive example of the former is Metrolink's Antelope Valley line. As for the 313, she is used on either the Lewis Shuttle or the full Brighton to Seaford service. The latter runs on a consistent half-hourly schedule throughout the day. One of my favourite things to do in this game is drive the Class 313 from Brighton to Seaford and back. The unit's not too difficult to drive, the line is reasonably scenic, especially once you get past Lewis, and it takes less than 40 minutes to complete a one-way trip. My favourite part of the journey is the single-track section between Newhaven Harbour and Seaford. Perhaps the most unusual service depicted on ECW is the so-called ghost train to Newhaven Marine. This was a parliamentary service run as a token gesture to avoid formal closure proceedings, as regular train services to Newhaven Marine stopped running in 2006. It wasn't until 2017 when the station and platform were demolished, and by 2019 it just looked like the trains were going off into a random siding for no real reason. Weirdly, Newhaven Marine wasn't officially closed until 2020. In the time since this add-on was released, the crossing at Newhaven Harbour has been permanently closed, and freight trains have started running to the redeveloped sidings just past the site of Newhaven Marine. As the TSW timetable is from around 2019, I think, you'll only see the Class 66 going as far as the old aggregates terminal just north of Newhaven town. One of the 66's playable services is a rail tour, using the Mark II coaches from Northern TransPennine, even though these coaches do not match the modern era seen on the East Coastway route. But this rail tour is a largely pointless addition because you can only drive it in one direction from Lewis to Eastbourne. There is no return service. As one might expect from a route this old, there are plenty of areas on East Coastway where the scenery is quite poor. For starters, there are several wide open fields without proper grass details, and the A27 motorway, visible from the railway between Falmer and Lewis, looks unrealistically quiet for a whacking great big dual carriageway. One thing that has always surprised me was the realistic branding on the football stadium at Falmer. To be clear, I don't have any mods installed on this route. This is the default look of the stadium. But despite the realistic detail on the football stadium, the big open fields next door look hideously basic. What's worse is that you can clearly see this because it's right next to Falmer Station. Talk about a major visual distraction spoiling the immersion. Not helping the situation are the large open fields between Lewis and Glynde, which look ugly due to their lack of proper foliage detail. This is still an annoying problem, even though I've come to expect it from even the modern TSW routes. By contrast, the fields on both sides of the track just past Berwick are full of good details, and I question the inconsistency, assuming I'm still allowed to question anything in TSW. To hear the fanboys talk, Anyone would think that we're only allowed to heap glowing praise on these things, despite the fact that not everyone is a DTG shill. The scenery directly surrounding Seaford Station is pretty awful. Almost everywhere you look, you see the same building assets copied and pasted several times over, and then there's this weirdly placed house at the street corner. Not to mention the weird path that the cars slide over as they turn the corner. Here's what the corner looks like in real life, as seen on Google Street View. Seaford Station, not to be confused with two identically named stations in Melbourne and Adelaide, Australia, opened in 1864, originally with two platforms. But weirdly, the one surviving platform is still numbered as Platform 2. Instead of having a normal layout for a terminus, such as Lowestoft or Llandudno, Seaford was designed as a through station for a proposed extension to Eastbourne, but this was never built. Considering that Skyhook Games came back and has significantly improved the scenery on their Midland mainline route, it's disappointing, but hardly surprising, to see Dovetail not bothering to do the same for their routes. I can take a wild guess as to where DTG's priorities actually lie. ECW suffers from the same problem as so many other TSW routes, even the more recent ones like Mainz to Koblenz. The interiors of the station buildings and signal boxes are not modelled. This is very disappointing because it hinders the immersion, especially since I thought the whole point of this game was to be able to get up out of your locomotive or train. For clarification, locomotives and trains are not the same thing, and then explore the world around you. You can't really do that when the buildings have no interior and are only there for show. At the end of the day, I don't think this route is worth $43.59 NZD, and the Class 313 is definitely not worth 29 New Zealand dollars. So I reckon that, if you want to try out this route for yourself, you should wait until a sale and get the route and a 313 on a discount. Despite its tiny size and inconsistent scenery quality, East Coastway is still one of my favourite British routes in TSW, on par with Island Line 2022, which, incidentally, is the only Rivet Games product that's anywhere near good. I can recommend East Coastway and Island Line 2022 to anyone who's looking to drive third rail EMUs on a modern image route, without having to deal with the more intensive and laggy rail scene in South London.